The story that we are going to read is about a certain son, a Japanese. It's a Japanese story. It's based on a Japanese story about a certain son who was very thoughtful and loving and very hardworking, and he was ready to fulfill his parents' wishes, and who was luckily bestowed with some kind of an unexpected help. Taro's reward. A young woodcutter named Taro lived with his mother and father on a lonely hillside. All day long he chopped wood in the forest. Though he worked very hard, he earned very little money. This made him sad, for he was a thoughtful son and wanted to give his old parents everything they needed. So there was a young woodcutter. Taro was a woodcutter. He made money by chopping wood in the forest all day, from dusk till dawn. He chopped wood. But even though he worked very hard, he earned very little money just by chopping wood, which made him very sad because he wanted to fulfill his parents' wishes. He wanted to do good things for his parents, but the money that he earned by chopping wood was a little too less to do what he wanted for his parents. So one evening, when Taro and his parents were sitting in a corner of their hut, a strong wind began to blow. It whistled through the cracks of the hut and everyone felt very cold. Suddenly, Taro's father said, "I wish I had a cup of sake. It would warm me and do my old heart good." So one evening, Taro and his parents, they were sitting in the corner of their hut. Their hut was also not properly built. It seems there were cracks in the hut, and when it was windy, all the wind could travel through the cracks of the hut, and everyone felt very cold. And then Taro's father, without having much thought, suddenly said, "Oh, I wish I had some sake. I wish I had a cup of sake." Sake is a Japanese drink. It's a Japanese alcoholic drink, and which they often have. Everybody has their own traditional drink. Even in Mizo, if we look back at our history, we have different kind of alcohol. Just like that, even other people from other countries, they all have their own traditional drink. So this sake is also a Japanese traditional drink, and Taro's father wanted to have that, just a cup. He said that if I had just one cup, it would warm my bones, and it would warm me and do my old heart good. This made Taro sadder than ever, for the heartwarming drink called sake was very expensive. How do I earn more money? He asked himself. How do I get a little sake for my poor old father? He decided to work harder than before. So, hearing his father's sigh, Taro was very sad. He was already sad that he could not provide much for his parents, but when his father exclaimed that he wanted just a cup of sake and that they could not and that he could not have it, that made Taro sadder, because sake was quite an expensive drink. So he was thinking to himself, how do I earn that much of money to get sake? And so he decided to work harder than before so that he could afford sake for his father. Next morning, Taro jumped out of bed earlier than usual and made his way to the forest. He chopped and cut as the sun climbed. And soon he was so warm that he had to take off his jacket. His mouth was dry and his face was wet with sweat. My poor old father, he thought. If only he was as warm as I. And with that, he began to chop even faster. thinking of the extra money he must earn to buy sake to warm the old man's bones. So the next morning, like we said, Taro was so keen to, like, Taro wanted to do everything that his parents wanted to fulfill whatever his parents wished. So the next morning, Taro, he jumped out of his bed earlier than the usual days and made his way to the forest. He chopped the wood, he cut them, chopped them until he felt so hot and he had to take off his jacket. And while he was feeling hot, he wished that his father could feel as hot as he did. And so, thinking of that, he chopped faster, just dreaming about the extra money that he could make just by chopping the wood, so that he would be able to afford sake to warm his old father's bones. Then suddenly Taro stopped chopping. What was that sound he heard? Could it possibly be rushing water? Taro could not remember ever seeing or hearing a rushing stream in that part of the forest. He was thirsty. The axe dropped out of his hands and he ran in the direction of the sound. It wasn't the first time that Taro was in that place, but that particular morning he heard like a sound of a gushing stream. So he wanted to know what is going on because he had never heard of such sound before. Taro saw a beautiful little waterfall hidden behind a rock. Kneeling at a place where the water flowed quietly, he cupped a little in his hands and put it to his lips. He cupped a little in his hands means he made his hands like a cup, and then he drank the water. Was it water or was it sake? He tasted it again and again, and always it was the delicious sake instead of cold water. So Taro went to check out what that gushing sound was, and then he saw a beautiful little waterfall behind a hidden rock, and then there was water that flowed out of it. He cupped the water in his hands and he tasted it, but it was supposed to be water, but then it was sake. He tasted it so many times, but still it was sake. Taro quickly filled the pitcher he had with him and hurried home. A pitcher is, a pot which is made out of mud. You keep water, it gets cool. It cannot get hot because it is made out of mud. The man was delighted with the sake. After only one swallow of the liquid, he stopped shivering and did a little dance in the middle of the floor. So he took home the sake with the pitcher that he had. When he reached home, he offered the sake to his father. Just one swallow of the liquid made his father dance because he was so happy, and he stopped shivering from cold, and so he did a little dance in the middle of the floor to show how happy he was to have that sake. That afternoon, a neighbor stopped by for a visit. Taro's father politely offered her a cup of sake. The lady drank it greedily and thanked the old man. Then Taro told her the story of the magic waterfall. Thanking them for the delicious drink, she left in a hurry. By nightfall, she had spread the story throughout the whole village. Women can be quite talkative. So they had a neighbor who dropped by, and Taro's father offered him the sake, and that politely, and the woman had a good drink. Then after she went home, she told the whole village about how Taro found sake in the forest, and that he found the magic waterfall, this and that. The whole story she told the whole village, and then the story filled the village with Taro's magic waterfall. That evening, there was a long procession of visitors to the woodcutter's house. Each man heard the story of the waterfall and took a sip of the sake. In less than an hour, the pitcher was empty. So that evening, there was a long procession of visitors, means an in line doa ta and there was a long queue to go into the to go to Taro's house, and each man heard the story of the waterfall, and they took a sip of the sake, and within less than an hour everything was done, everything was finished, the pitcher was empty. And the next morning, Taro started for work even earlier than the morning before. He carried with him the largest pitcher he owned, for he intended first of all to go to the waterfall. When he reached it, he was greatly surprised to find all his neighbors there. They were carrying pitchers, jars, buckets, anything they could find to hold the magic sake. Then one villager knelt and held his mouth under the waterfall to drink. He drank again and again, and then shouted angrily, "Water, nothing but water." Others also tried, but there was no sake, only cold water. Taro, so the next day, he started for work earlier than the usual days, even earlier than the day before. He carried the largest pitcher that they had in order to keep the sake. And so, but that morning, that morning, all the neighbors were there in the forest. They all went there to get the sake for themselves, and they carried with them pitchers, buckets, whatever they could find, the largest in their own homes to keep the magic sake. And then one villager, he knelt down and then he cupped the water. Then one villager, he knelt down and held the drink in his hand and trying to drink it. He drank it again and again. He drank it again and again. But then he says that it was water, nothing but water. Others also tried drinking it. They could not taste the sake. They could taste only water. "We have been tricked," shouted the villagers. "Where is Taro? Let us drown him in the waterfall." But Taro had been wise enough to slip behind a rock. When he saw how things were going, he was nowhere to be found. They thought that they had been tricked by Taro, and they were very angry. They wanted to drown him in the waterfall. But Taro, having witnessed all this behind a rock, he hid behind a rock, and he was nowhere to be found. Muttering in anger and disappointment, the villagers left the place one by one. Taro came out from the hiding place. Was it true? He wondered. Was the sake a dream? Once more he caught some liquid in his hand and put it in his lips. It was the same fine sake. But to the thoughtful son, the magic waterfall gave the delicious sake. To everyone else, it gave only cold water. So every villager, they were grumbling. They were angry and disappointed at the waterfall and Taro. And they left the place. When everyone left, Taro came out of his hiding place, and then he was thinking, "Oh, was it a dream? Was it just a dream about the sake?" So just to make sure, he again put the water to his lips, drank it again. But to him, when he tasted it, it was the same fine sake. So it means that the waterfall gave only Taro, the thoughtful son, sake, and to everyone else it gave cold water. The story of Taro and his magic waterfall reached the Emperor of Japan. He sent for the young woodcutter and rewarded him with 20 pieces of gold for having been so good and kind. Then he named the most beautiful fountain in the city after Taro. This, said the emperor, was to encourage all children to honor and obey their parents. And so this is the story of how Taro was rewarded for being a very thoughtful and hardworking son. Nature rewarded him, and now it reached the ears of the Emperor of Japan, And the Emperor of Japan was very pleased of how Taro lived and how good and kind he was to his parents. He was so impressed by Taro that he named the most beautiful fountain in the city after Taro. And this, he said, was to encourage all children. He did it to encourage all children to honor and obey their parents, just like Taro. And that's the end of the story. Whenever you listen, whenever you are given anything to do with your parents or anything like that, even in the Bible it says that you have to obey your parents in the Lord, for this is right. So that is why you will be rewarded, even if you may not be rewarded at that moment like Taro, but you will be rewarded somehow if you are obedient to your parents. So being obedient towards your parents is the most important thing for a child to do. That's it for today, and the next class we will be doing working with text and working with language, and that's all. Thank you, class.